Hello, and welcome to the Simply Business Interview Podcast, a podcast created by business owners for business owners. I am your host, John Jennings. And I believe that most business owners are working way too hard for much too little. And one of our issues is that we overcomplexify things. I believe the answers are almost always within us or within our reach. I like to say that I'm a simple man with simple ideas. So welcome to Simply Business. All right. So today we are joined by Geoff Marietta. Some of you may have seen the interview I did with Gil Harlan a few weeks ago, a couple months ago. That was just super enlightening. Gil's an amazing guy, and Gil introduced me to Geoff as one of his partners in the work he's doing in Harlan. Geoff is an entrepreneur, business owner, doing a lot of cool and interesting things. And so just look forward to hearing a little more of his story and see what kind of learnings we can get from him. So Geoff, why don't you first introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, John. I really appreciate it and looking forward to the conversation. I live in Harlan, Kentucky, which is down in the southeast corner of Kentucky. And my wife and I run a number of small businesses. We have a restaurant called Harlan County Beer Company, full service brewery. We have a coffee shop called Moonbow Tipple that also has an Appalachian bookstore in it. And then we have a cafe and ice cream parlor in Williamsburg called Moonbow Mercantile. And then we have a event and Airbnb space in Corbin called Second and Main. And all of those buildings we renovated, and they were vacant and renovated into operating businesses. And so we've been doing that for the last about 7 or 8 years. And during that time, I also founded a business accelerator and pitch contest called Invest 606. Right now, I'm spending some time in the healthcare industry, helping out addiction recovery care, which is the largest treatment provider of substance use disorder in the state. I'm helping them out with their finance and, just a new challenge in a new industry. But, in Eastern Kentucky, everyone wears many different hats. And so that's kind of where I've been led to, is just wherever I can be useful in my work in Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah, that's some amazing stuff, and quite the variety. I'm familiar with the folks at ARC. I've worked with healthcare clients in a variety of places, and some in Eastern Kentucky as well. Not with ARC directly, but with some of the other providers. So really, really interesting. I have this desire suddenly to go on a road trip around Eastern Kentucky and sample all your food and stay in your bed and breakfast and have a beer there in Harlan. Sounds like a lot of fun. What first thing that comes to mind? Most people go to college, go get a job somewhere and fall into that corporate trap. That some people get stuck in for life. For me, I finally escaped after a couple of decades. You seem to just immediately plug yourself straight into these different entrepreneurial ventures, if I'm kind of understanding it correctly. What led you down that path versus the path that probably so many other folks do?
Yeah, I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I don't really, or even a business owner. I don't think I really even knew what that meant.
Right.
I went to college. I wanted to be a park ranger.
Wow.
So I grew up in northern Minnesota, up on the Iron Range, which is a mining community.
Okay, I knew the accent was not Eastern Kentucky.
No, my wife's from here.
Okay.
And I went and got a degree in forestry, and then I started my career actually in education. And I was a teacher out in the Navajo Nation, and that's where I met my wife.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so for the first 5 years of my career, I was in education and coaching baseball. And then got a real passion for the business side of education, and then ended up getting my MBA. My wife and I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I started my MBA at Harvard. And then we were in Cambridge for about 12 years. And I think that's where I really learned about entrepreneurship. And it was a sort of a special side project that I started based off some research that I was doing on virtual worlds and how people
Hmm.
learn in virtual worlds, and got some really cool findings and sort of launched a business off of that. And
Hmm.
it was then that I sort of saw the power of employing people and providing, work that, you use your brain for, that pays a good wage. And we'd actually set up a little sort of side project here in Eastern Kentucky with some folks to actually work on this virtual world business. And that was in 2012. And I just saw, like, at that point in time, the coal industry was hitting kind of the bottom, and there weren't like any tech jobs in Eastern Kentucky, like zero.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
for a lot of the folks who were working with me on that, it was like the first time that they'd been paid to do, technological work,
Mhm.
especially around coding and media. And, it was just really cool to see, how that all evolved and how excited they were. And so fast forward a few years, my mother-in-law got very sick. And so my wife and I were kind of trying to figure out what we were doing in Boston. And we had two young kids, and we're like, what are we doing with, our lives here? We're on this, in this rat
Right.
race, and paying people to take care of our kids and working all the time for accolades that don't really mean much. And so we decided to move back to Eastern Kentucky, and I sold most of my shares in my software company and then invested in Main Street buildings in Eastern Kentucky. And that was in 2015. And sort of that's where I think by the time I had sort of been working with my software company, at that point I knew what an entrepreneur was, and I
Yeah.
understood like that whole world. I was like immersed in it, in
Yeah.
Boston, which was awesome. And so, and then moved here and just kind of just saw there's so much opportunity in Eastern Kentucky. And I think that's the one thing that, people I think often miss, and one thing that I was always told is, if you want to be a good investor, you have to know a secret, that nobody else knows. And I think one secret that I try to tell people, and I'm not sure how receptive they are, but Eastern Kentucky is a great investment. And I've already seen that happen over the 10 or so years that we've been living here, that I now call home.
Wow. That's quite a journey. It's so interesting. I one side of me is thinking I've been to Boston many times. I know what that's like, and I know Eastern Kentucky pretty well. My in-laws are there. I actually went to Eastern Kentucky University. I didn't go to Harvard. I went to EKU. So I know where you're at. I know a lot about that area, and you just can't get much different. So talk about that. I mean, what from a mindset standpoint, how did you reconcile that, with your kids?
Yeah, I
Obviously, your
mean,
wife was from there, but yeah,
yeah, yeah, two very different worlds. And I think that both have a lot of really, really great things, and both of them have some things that the other one could have some more of.
yeah,
And, I think for me, I'd grown up in a rural community, and I think, the one thing that I feel like, people don't fully understand in like a large metropolitan area, on like a deep emotional level, is community.
Mhm.
And that this idea, or not even idea, this actuality that strangers in a small town will do whatever they can to help you out if something comes up, and
Yeah.
I think, it's very communal. And I think that's the one thing that I think gets lost sometimes in a very fast-paced urban environment,
Yeah.
is that communalism, that people come together as a community to take care of one another. And that also there's different points of view, and you still have to see that person at the grocery store or go to the doctor,
Mm,
or and so
right.
there's sort of a there can be a little bit more open disagreement, and also acknowledge that, hey, I'm still going to get along with that person. I still
Yes.
am going to care about that person. And that's, I think, um why we moved back here is, part of that is, I feel like, in today's society, a lot of that is missing. And I feel like in small town America and in small town Eastern Kentucky, you can still find that sort of, your kids go ride their bikes out till it's dusk, they're watched over, you can have a family friend pick your kid up at school, people are going to be watching your kids and your family and watching out for you. And so I think this is a long-winded answer to your question, but I just always want to try to push, back on this narrative that Eastern Kentucky is a bad place to live, or it's not a good place to raise your family, when, or not even a good place to be an entrepreneur, when it's like quite literally the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. Kentucky's a special place. I've lived here my whole life. And there's something about, especially when you get outside of the cities, that community. It's hard to explain. One of my first jobs was with a company that moved a bunch of people from Manhattan, New York City, down here to Kentucky, and they actually gave them an out, like a 6 month out. If you can't handle it, we'll move you back. And about half of them did. Said, this is just a different lifestyle. But then there were some others that completely took to it, and are still here today, 20, 30 years later. So it is very different, but it's also, in some places it's almost like going back in time a little bit.
Yeah,
uh,
it,
you know,
it is. And you just have to be okay with that.
yeah, yeah, and people should be. I mean, don't judge. It's often just a great lifestyle. Well, so tell me about this decision to invest in these properties. I mean, that's really, I love the idea of. I mean, that's supporting the community, that's giving jobs to the community, all that sort of stuff. What drove you there, and just tell a little bit about that experience.
Well, I mean, I think that part of it was uh, just believing in the power of Main Street, and wanting to revitalize that, and also just looking at Eastern Kentucky and seeing how many assets it has, its natural beauty, the people, the culture. And then at the same time, you see just massive divestment, at the time that we were moving here. It was 2015. I think all of the major coal producers had declared bankruptcy.
Right.
It was bleak, and it had been bleak. It wasn't like it just snapped and became bleak at that point in time, in terms of economics. It'd been kind of a long road to hitting the nadir, the bottom, which was right around that time. And it was just like, you looked at these buildings and you could buy a building for like $5,000 or $10,000. And yeah, it needed a lot of work, and all that, but you could just see, these historic buildings, they weren't going anywhere as long as you could put a roof on them. And so part of it was just trying to see the opportunity there. And then the other part, honestly, was a little bit out of frustration. Like, we had left Cambridge where, within a 10-minute walk, there was probably 15 different coffee shops that I could go
Oh yeah.
to, and come to Harlan where there was no coffee shop. And for me, that was like, I complained about it, because I'd want to sit and do business or have a meeting, and there was literally, I would have to like, to get internet, I would like have to go, into the public library, to sit and get the internet if I was going to work from town. And so in the beginning, I'm like, I really want a coffee shop in Harlan. It didn't really turn out that way. It eventually turned out that way, but so I just started looking. I actually wrote this long, heartfelt, 3-page single space letter to this building owner, where the shop is now. He was trying to sell the building for like 200,000, it was needed new everything, complete gut, complete reno. And so I was like telling him like that's not I not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not this carpetbagger coming in here. I believe in Main Street. I grew up in a small town. I have a vision for this building, here it is. And then, I didn't hear anything, and we ended up buying this other building in Corbin. And then a year later to that date, he reached back out to me, and
Wow.
we eventually like worked up this crazy deal, that I ended up buying the building for $1 and then paying like these royalties and stuff. So, but honestly, it was both like, one, just seeing the opportunity, two, being from, a smaller mining town and knowing the value of Main Street. And then I think three was just trying to be kind of wise with an investment. And
Mhm.
this is like funny. I don't know if it's funny. I don't know what it means, but I read this article about the former owner of the Dodgers, and he was going through this acrimonious divorce, and it all came out that he was able to buy the Dodgers by putting up this parking garage in Boston as collateral. And it was just, the parking garage, was appraised at like 600 million or something like that. And he had basically taken that and said, okay, here's my collateral for the Dodgers. And I thought, and I don't know if it was like I just put two and two together, and I probably should have learned it earlier on in my life. But I was like, wow, like that's how people build wealth, is through real estate. And I don't think I fully grasped that, one, because I'd never had like a big, and say big, like when I left my software company and sold most of my shares, it was like $175,000. And I'd never like had that amount of money all at once. And then when you have that amount of money, then you're suddenly able to do things in real estate that no one else, if you don't have that, you can't do it.
Right.
So I think, maybe I was just smart enough to like take two and two and put it together, and then
Yeah.
decide to go into real estate. And so I think that's kind of, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure that part out, but that's kind of how all that came together.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's interesting, and it's a great lesson, I think. You know, so 100, we'd say 175,000 or whatever. That's not a huge amount of money, especially in Boston terms. That's not a lot at all.
No.
But you took that and found ways in an area where there are a lot of needs, and you made an impact probably really quickly. How how have the locals responded to this Minnesota guy who doesn't talk like them? Because I know exactly how they. In fact, I could do it in my Eastern Kentucky accent if I wanted to, but I won't. How did they take to you coming in?
Well, I think, one thing is my wife's family has pretty deep connections in Harlan,
Yeah.
and we moved here. My mother-in-law passed away very suddenly. So we were like immediately like embraced in terms of a grieving process. And then, my oldest son is named Harlan, and
Oh
we
wow.
didn't we didn't really, I don't think we never thought, and obviously God has other plans, but I think we never thought we'd be living in Harlan with a kid named Harlan. And And so I think,
Well, and then Colonel Sanders is Harlan and you're in Corbin. So you're in his
yeah.
hometown too. You
So
got
I
Harlan
think
all over
that
the place.
you do. And I think that, and that, but and I don't think, the name, it's quirky. And I think it's funny to tell people, who don't know my family. But, the main thing is that I was raising my kids here. And I think that that's what you often see with people who are moving in here. They move in, without children often if they don't have any connections. And then
Yeah.
when they have children, they leave. And I
Yeah.
think they were seeing people who he had connections, my wife's family, but who moved here who had obviously other options.
Yeah.
And we were saying, no, we want to raise our kids here and we believe in this community. And then on top of that, when we were still living in Harlan, when we invested in Corbin, and I think that building in Corbin, we did a beautiful job renovating it into an event space. And then people started to see what we were doing and they were like, oh, wow, like they really care about this community and they did a beautiful job here. Like they're taking their money and they're investing it in our community because they believe in the community, even if I don't. Because that's the other thing is the biggest pushback. I never got a lot of pushback. Oh, you're not from around here. Like, yeah, there's maybe, I'm sure a few people have said that, but the bigger thing is like, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Why would you do that here?
Yeah, you're
Right.
gonna you're gonna fail. That's not gonna work. Like it's been tried before. And I think, that's the difference is like and the other thing that I'm very intentional about is I try to be is not to make a big splash and a big announcement, but just to quietly do the work,
Yeah.
and get it open and show people instead of making, promises and trying to build up your ego or whatever. Because that's another thing that you often see here, is people trying to make a grandiose,
Yeah. They make a big announcement. They bring
yeah,
in the press, bring in the
yep,
governor, and
yep,
then it falls apart. I've
yep.
seen that happen so many times
Yeah,
over there.
so many. Yeah, I mean, just since I've been here at least a dozen times that I
Wow.
know of. So I think, and then you just, treat people with respect. Like you treat them like they matter, and I mean, it's a simple, it
Yeah.
sounds simple, but I think a lot of times where people have bad experiences moving into communities that they're not a part of is that they have a sense of sort of savior syndrome or they think that they're better than smarter than
Right.
just even if they are not aware of it, just that little bit of insincerity or of arrogance is so apparent. Like people, you can just sniff it from a mile away.
Yeah.
And so, because the people here, gosh, they're like so welcoming. They're so curious. Like, that's what I tell people. Like, don't be afraid to tell people you're from New York City. Like, people around here is fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
don't try to hide that about yourself. Don't try to like put on overalls and flannel and, fake an accent by saying y'all. Just be who you are. Like people around here, I talk about Minnesota all the time because, it's like yesterday, it's funny, it snowed a bunch and I was out sledding with my boys and their buddies, and they're like building a jump, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, you got to build the jump. Like, you don't build it at the bottom. You got to build it like midway. And I was like, and they're like, whoa, like, and you're just imparting different pieces of where you grew up. Because if you think about it, obviously there are Native Americans here, but mining communities in particular are immigrant communities.
Hmm.
They are communities that were built, up in Minnesota, like it's the same thing, like in Hibbing, you know, where Bob Dylan's from, by the way. I gotta just
Okay.
make a plug there. Italians, Swedes, Polish, like people from all over,
Right.
the world settled, in northern Minnesota, just like they settled here in Harlan and in eastern Kentucky to find better opportunity for themselves through hard work.
Yeah. Cool. So, to, this is all sound great. I'm sure there's been a few challenges. What's the biggest challenge you're kind of facing right now? If you kind of look at the horizon,
I
what do you,
think, it's been interesting because the growth and the traction that you've seen in Eastern Kentucky has been much faster than I think I even dreamed of. When I see like in Corbin, when we bought that building, everyone said we would fail. Half the buildings were vacant. Now that town has, I mean, pretty much 0% vacancy. There's been massive
really?
investment in the downtown, tons of new businesses. It's now huge attraction, tons of dining spots, shopping, like just
Wow.
absolute phenomenal, growth. And then you also see that trickle out into the eastern parts. And I think, the challenge right now is just, how to keep that excitement and that momentum, keep moving forward in a sustainable way. I think that's going to be one, big challenge. Another big challenge, now there's been a foundation built in terms of diversifying the economy more towards, work from home or, virtual work. So that's a big one, but then also tourism, and things like that. So it's a more diversified economy, but there's still big missing holes in a functioning diversified economy. So like short-term lodging
Yeah.
is a critical acute need in Eastern Kentucky. And I don't know if Gil talked about the hotel project that he has going on in Harlan, but that those kinds of projects, that offer higher quality, short-term lodging. Obviously, any nicer full service type restaurants, that can bolster, both people who are moving here who've never lived here, who have a certain expectation of certain services. Not crazy, but like basic, right? Like you want a good restaurant, you want a good coffee shop.
Yeah.
If your family comes into town, you want to be able to host them at a nice hotel or something like that.
Right.
And we are seeing a lot of people have moved, to Eastern Kentucky from Ohio, Michigan, California, Colorado, Florida, buying, houses and land unseen, sight unseen. And, we know we meet them at our brewery. Like, yeah, I had this couple come and talk with them, they just moved here about 6 months ago and they were like, your brewery was what finally sealed the deal for us, and
That's
so
awesome.
yeah, and it's but you have that, there are these other, I guess, voids that you need to sort of fill. And if you don't, there's, if you can't just not fill them, because if you don't, then the momentum that you built will start to sort of slow or crumble.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably where my thinking is right now.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. One of my first clients, when I started my business 7 years ago, I guess, was a microbrewery that was opening up in Pennsylvania, but in Appalachia, just a little further north. And it was a lot of the same kind of things. It was a small town that was, never had a brewery before, never, had some of those things, had some nice restaurants, but didn't have much in the way of hotels and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, they helped put it on the map. And since they've opened it, there's distilleries come in and some other things. So it's interesting how sometimes it just takes that one uh, key piece of the puzzle to just
Yeah, Gil
start
calls
filling it
it,
in.
Gil calls it, what does he call it? He said it's something acupuncture. It's he calls it anyway, I'll have to it's like not it's not Main Street, it's not maybe it's I think he calls it urban acupuncture.
Okay.
And that's, that is, what he would say is, exactly what you're saying is like you pick these critical, like you don't try to do like a whole block, right? At
Oh
one.
yeah.
You pick like one key building and then you pick another key building and sort of build it from there.
Yeah. Encourage others then to come in and invest as
That's the
well.
key part, and that's what happened in Corbin is, the lawyers and the doctors, they're inherently conservative, and so, they want to kind of sit back and wait. They're the one, they got deeper pockets, but they're not on, I don't want to blanket and say they're not entrepreneurial, but they're in their profession for a certain reason.
Yeah.
But that's what you see is like once the doctors and lawyers start putting money into the downtown, then you're good
Yeah.
because they can take a little bit of ebb and flow and have deeper pockets to do, not try to bootstrap all the renovations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, just as we wrap up, I always ask a question more or less like this. If you're talking to some young entrepreneur that's thinking about investing, let's imagine that person is thinking of getting out of the city and investing or coming back to Eastern Kentucky. What type of advice, what piece of advice would you give for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say number one piece of advice I always tell anybody is just to follow what you're passionate about, what you love, what you want to do, and the money will eventually come to you. So don't try to, and obviously that's a simplification, but just do what you most love. And then another piece of advice, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be solving a problem. And
Mm,
that's the big thing, so anytime you're thinking about something, just think like, what problem am I solving?
yeah.
And those
And
are
will
the,
people pay for the solution? I always
yeah,
say that's
yes.
the other part. I actually worked with an entrepreneur once who he was solving a problem. It was just one that nobody was willing to pay for. Everybody's just willing to let it go. Actually, I've seen that a few times, especially in
Yeah,
healthcare. Real
that's
common in
very
healthcare.
true.
People will think they're solving a problem, and the system says no. We've already accounted for that. We don't want to solve it. Um, and I've seen that several times. So
Well,
that's
especially in healthcare, I
yeah,
think, because the healthcare system is so disincentivized to actually solve problems.
yeah. One
And
of them was they had designed something that would help reduce no shows for colonoscopies. Colonoscopies have the highest no shows of
sure,
any type of appointment. No surprise. And so they built a product that would help take no shows from like 30% down to 10% or something. Basically the system said we account for it.
yeah.
We account for 30% no shows. It's not a big
Like we
deal.
overscheduled by 30% and
Yeah,
we
it's
need to get a
like
unique
planes,
system.
overscheduling their seats. They just account for it and they don't care. And so yeah, I've seen that. So that yeah, that's great advice to solve a problem, but also solve a problem people are willing to pay for.
Well, and you find out soon enough if they
Oh
won't.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But sadly, it's a lot of times after you've done a lot of work building something. You know. Uh, well, Geoff, thank you for coming on the program. I appreciate your stories, and you're certainly another like Gil. You're an inspiration to people um, who want to invest in the communities. I think we need to do more of propping up our communities, whether you're hitting something like Nulu here in Louisville or Harlan and Corbin. And I've been to all those towns. It's been a long time since I've been to any of those towns. I can't. I'm gonna have to go see Corbin now because last time I was there, it was not like that. So definitely need to go back and check it out. So thank you again for coming on, and thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for what you're doing. This is awesome. Maybe someday I'll be in your position and can do what you're doing. But yeah, thanks for having me on and much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked it, please share or like it on whatever platform you use. You can find me on social media. On most platforms, I'm John K. Jennings. My first book is also available. Your Baby is Ugly tells you about 10 truths that business owners need to hear, but often won't, and how to overcome them. You can find it on Amazon. Just search for Your Baby is Ugly. And be watching for our next episode, where I'll interview another business owner who will share their stories and insights into what it's like to create a great business.